Hello. Moving my hair out of the way so I can read for you. Good to see you. Just been on a walk. I was getting footage for the film, which I was so depressed about a few days ago. But I'm feeling better. I think a little time away and a little distance from it has given me a better full view of it. Today I have a huge ass glass of icy water with me. Um, And once again, somewhere in this hidden your hint, I have this huge glass of icy water because I went on a big long walk and I went overboard on the ice. But now it will keep me cool because I have a tendency to get heat stroke. Fun fact, I went to Paris um, after I graduated high school. It was my senior gift, which was very nice. It was a very nice senior gift. I admit it. But I got heat exhaustion. I literally got heat exhaustion. So I actually, a few people can claim this fame, but I actually ended up yakking in one of Paris's most famous and beautiful gardens because I was dehydrated and it was hot as hell. So there's your little tidbit for you today. So because you've probably had enough of that, I will get to the book itself. I can see that I lost someone's interest there. Bye. Oh, hello. That wasn't a fun. Yeah, today in class, we were talking about like how theaters used to be lit by just candlelight, and I was like, fun fact, women used to burn to death because they'd catch their skirts on fire, and it was not a fun fact. I'm just full of little facts that I want people to know, but they're not fun, so I don't know how to say them. Okay, anyways, we should talk about what happened yesterday. We got to read 2 chapters yesterday, which is pretty good, because the chapters have been getting hefty, Jane. I can't keep doing this. Okay. Oh, yes. So, Eleanor goes for a walk in the park with Mrs. Jennings, and there she runs into Miss Steele, Lucy's older sister. This is way too much ice. Miss Steele, Lucy's older sister, who's like, oh my god, let me tell you the real story. Is the clue the open drawer? Yes. Yes, it's something in the drawer. I'm joking. Maybe. Who knows? Who knows? I'll reveal at the end of the chapter. Ding! Okay. Sorry. I got lost. Okay, so she meets Miss Steele in the park. Miss Steele is like, oh my god, did you hear what happened? So, like, my sister, turns out, like, Edward came over. He was like, girl, we can't get married. Like, you gonna be poor. And my sister was like, no, we have to get married. I love you. And he's like, girl, we can't. And she's like, no, I'll do anything. And so they're still getting married. Isn't that so sweet? And Eleanor's like, yeah, so sweet. And then she goes home and she gets this note from Lucy. And Lucy is like, ugh, Edward came over and he was like, I love you so much. This won't stop me. And I was like, no, we shan't get married. No, I won't let it happen to you. And Eleanor was like, let's think. What happened? The Lucy and Edward tried to pull it off, but then he just got stuck further. So who knows what he's doing? Whatever it is, it's not the best. More. I'm like having to navigate. Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to think what happened to the next one. Okay. So in the next chapter, oh yeah. So Mrs. Jennings is watching Eleanor and Colonel Brandon, and she's like, he just asked her to marry her, didn't he? Oh my god, they're gonna get married. And then meanwhile, what Colonel Brandon and Eleanor are really talking about, 2 times speed. Good God. Good God, Patricia. How dare you compromise the academic integrity of my video for you? I'm joking. I'm sure it was an experience because I already talk super fast. Sorry, I'm incredibly Oh my God. Usually I drink a full pot of tea during my 9 a.m. class, and usually I'm fine. But today I drank a full pot of green tea, and I did not realize how much more caffeinated green tea was than black tea, apparently, because I was jazzed. It was bad. I had to, in the break, go, run around circles in my backyard. That's how jazzed I was. Again, not important to Sense and Sensibility. Okay, sorry. I should try doing a live video at 2 times speed. Dan, I don't know how much faster I can go. Okay, anyway, so sorry. Okay, tell that to my anxiety this morning, Patricia. I don't know what was going on. It was the tea that we bought in Granada. It was the green tea. I don't know because I can drink a full pot of the black tea, but the green tea really just did me dirty. Anyways, so Colonel Brandon was, oh God, I froze. So Colonel Brandon what he was really saying to Eleanor, he's like, damn, Edward seems like a nice dude. I'll give him the parsonage in the area where I live. And Eleanor's like, wow, that's so nice. Like, he'll get married and then you'll have a great neighbor. 2 great neighbors. Yeah, super great neighbors. And then he's like, oh, no, you're mistaken. Like, it's not enough money to get married on. And she's like, oh. And he's like, yeah, I'm not going to support him into getting a wife. Like, I don't know him that well. And that would be a lot of money for me, to give him enough money to have a wife. Like, he's poor. Come on, Eleanor. Like, you can't expect me to be good to poor people. That's not what he was doing. I see what he was doing. He's like, come on, I don't know this guy that well, but I'll do him this little favor and he can figure out the rest. And Eleanor's like, oh, interesting. And then he's like, but you'll tell him, right? Like, you can tell him for us. And Eleanor's like, can I tell him for you? Do I want to do that? And I guess yes is the answer, because Eleanor cannot say no, and will suffer for anyone who asks, much like myself. Every character in this novel, including Marianne, is me at some point. Eleanor, Colonel Brandon, Edward, and Marianne all have aspects of my personality. If you combined all of them, you get one Sophie Covarrubias. And let me tell you, it's a bad place to live. It's a bad place to live smack dab in the middle of all of those anxieties. Oh, I'm really losing it today. I cannot drink that green tea again. All right, let's start this thing. I don't want to put this on my wood desk, so I'm going to open up my class notes and put it on my class notes. Starting to sweat, much like myself. Okay, I'm done now. I'm just gonna read. Give the people what they want. Sense and Sensibility, Volume 3, Chapter 4. Well, Miss Dashwood, said Mrs. Jennings, ooh, new word, sagaciously smiling as soon as the gentleman had withdrawn. I do not ask you what the Colonel has been saying to you, for, though upon my honour I tried to keep out of hearing, I could not help catching enough to understand his business. And I assure you, I never was better pleased in my life, and wished the joy of it with all my heart. Thank you, ma'am, said Eleanor. Oh, boy. It is a matter of great joy to me, and I feel the goodness of Colonel Brandon most sensibly. There are not many men who would act as he has done. Few people who have so compassionate a heart. I never was more astonished in my life. Lord, my dear, you are very modest. I am the least astonished in the world, for I have often thought of late there was nothing more likely to happen. Oh, this is rich. You judged from your knowledge of the Colonel's general benevolence, but at least you could not foresee that the opportunity would so very soon occur. Opportunity? Repeated Mrs. Jennings. Oh, as to that, when a man has once made up his mind to such a thing, somehow or other he will soon find an opportunity. Well, my dear, I wish you joy of it again and again, and if ever there was a happy couple in the world, I think I shall soon know where to look for them. Oh my God! You mean to go to Delaford after them, I suppose? Said Eleanor, with a faint smile. Aye, my dear, that I do indeed. As to the house being a bad one, I do not know what the Colonel would be at, for it is a good one as I ever saw. He spoke of its being out of repair. Well, and whose fault is that? Why don't he repair it? Who should do it but himself? They were interrupted by the servants coming in to announce the carriage being at the door. Oh boy. And Mrs. Jennings, immediately preparing to go, said, "Well, my dear, I must be gone before I have half my talk out. But, however, we may have it all over in the evening, for we shall be quite alone. I do not ask you to go with me, for I dare say your mind is too full of the matter to care for your company. And besides, you must long to tell your sister all about it." Marianne had left the room before the conversation began. "Certainly, ma'am. I shall tell Marianne of it, and I shall not mention it at present to anybody else." "Oh, very well," said Mrs. Jennings, rather disappointed. "Then you would not have me tell it Lucy, for I think of going as far as Holborn today." "No, ma'am, not even Lucy, if you please. One day's delay will not be very material. Until I have written to Mr. Ferris, I think it ought not to be mentioned to anybody else. I shall do that directly. It is of importance that no time should be lost with him, for he will, of course, have much to do relative to his ordination." This speech at first puzzled Mrs. Jennings exceedingly. Why Mr. Ferris was to be written to about in such a hurry she could not immediately comprehend. A few moments' reflection, however, produced a very happy idea, and she exclaimed, "Oh, I understand you. Mr. Ferris is to be the man. Well, so much the better for him. Aye, to be sure, he must be ordained in readiness. And I am very glad to find things are so forward between you. But, my dear, is this not rather out of character? Should not the Colonel write himself? Sure, he is the proper person." Eleanor did not quite understand the beginning of Mrs. Jennings' speech, neither did she think it worth inquiring into, and therefore only replied to its conclusion. "Colonel Brandon is so delicate a man that he rather wished anyone to announce his intentions to Mr. Ferris than himself." Oh my god. Oh, this is so good. Oh my god. Okay. "And so you are forced to do it. Well, that is an odd kind of delicacy. However, I will not disturb you," seeing her preparing to write. "You know your own concerns best. So goodbye, my dear. I have not heard of anything to please me so well since Charlotte was brought to bed." And away she went, but returning again in a moment. "I have just been thinking of Betty's sister, my dear. I should be very glad to get her so good a mistress. But whether she would do for a lady's maid, I am sure I can't tell. She is an excellent housemaid, and works very well at her needle. However, you will think of all that at your leisure." "Certainly, ma'am," replied Eleanor, not hearing much of what she said, and more anxious to be alone than to be mistress of the subject. How she should begin, how she should express herself in her note to Edward was now all her concern. The particular circumstances between them made difficulty of that which to any other person would have been the easiest thing in the world. But she equally feared to say too much or too little, and sat deliberating over her paper with the pen in her hand, till broken in, oh my God, till broken in on by the entrance of Edward himself. Law! I've got a strawberry seed stuck in my teeth. I'm sure you wanted to know that. He had met Mrs. Jennings at the door in her way to the carriage, as he came to leave his farewell card, and she, after apologizing for not returning herself, had obliged him to enter by saying that Miss Dashwood was above and wanted to speak with him on very particular business. Eleanor had just been congratulating herself in the midst of her perplexity that however difficult it might be to express herself properly by letter, it was at least preferable to giving the information by word of mouth, when her visitor entered to force her upon this greatest exertion of all. Her astonishment and confusion were very great on his so sudden appearance. She had not seen him before since his engagement became public, and therefore not since knowing her to be acquainted with it, which, with the consciousness of what she had been thinking of, and what she had to tell him, made her feel particularly uncomfortable for some minutes. He too was much distressed, and they sat down together in a most promising state of embarrassment. Whether he had asked for her pardon for his intrusion on first coming into the room, he could not recollect, but determining to be on the safe side, he made his apology in form as soon as he could say anything after taking a chair. "Mrs. Jennings told me," said he,
that you wished to speak with me. At least I understood her so. Or certainly I certainly should have not intruded on you in such a manner, though at the same time I should have been extremely sorry to leave London without seeing you and your sister, especially as it will most likely be some time. It is not probable that I should soon have the pleasure of meeting you again. I go to Oxford tomorrow." "You would not have gone, however," said Eleanor, recovering herself, and determined to get over what she had so much dreaded as soon as possible, "without receiving our good wishes, even if we had not been able to give them in person. Mrs. Jennings was quite right in what she said. I have something of consequence to inform you of, which I was on the point of communicating by paper. I am charged with the most agreeable office," breathing rather faster than usual as she spoke. "Colonel Brandon, who was here only 10 minutes ago, has desired me to say, understanding you mean to take orders, has had a, has he has great pleasure in offering you the living of Delaford, now just vacant, and only wishes it were more valuable. Allow me to congratulate you on having so respectable and well judging a friend, and to join in his wish that living, it is about 200 a year, were much more considerable, and such as might better enable you to, as might be more than a temporary accommodation to yourself. In short, as might establish all your views of happiness." What Edward felt, as he could not say it himself, it cannot be expected that any one else should say for him. He looked all the astonishment which such unexpected, such unthought of information could not fail of exciting. But he said only these two words, "Colonel Brandon!" "Yes," continued Eleanor, gathering more resolution as some of the worst was over. "Colonel Brandon means it as a testimony of his concern for what has lately passed, for the cruel situation in which the unjustifiable conduct of your family has placed you, a concern which I am sure Marianne, myself, and all your friends must share, and likewise as proof of his high esteem for your general character, and his particular approbation of your behaviour on the present occasion." "Colonel Brandon gave me a living. Can it be possible? The unkindness of your own relation has made you astonished to find friendship anywhere." "No," he replied with sudden consciousness, "not to find it in you, for I cannot be ignorant that to you, to your goodness, I owe it all. I feel it. I would express it if I could. But as you well know, I am no orator. Why do you want to be a priest, buddy? Their job is oration." I lost it. Oh, there we go. "You are very much mistaken. I do assure you that you owe it entirely, at least almost entirely, to your own merit and Colonel Brandon's discernment of it. I have had no hand in it. I did not even know, till I understood his design, that the living was vacant, nor had it ever occurred to me that he might have had such a living in his gift. As a friend of mine, of my family, he may perhaps, indeed I know he has, still greater pleasure in bestowing it, but upon my word you owe nothing to my solicitation." Truth obliged her to acknowledge some small share in the action, but she was at the same time so unwilling to appear as the benefactress of Edward, that she acknowledged it with hesitation, which probably contributed to fix that suspicion in his mind which had recently entered it. For a short time he sat deep in thought, after Eleanor had ceased to speak. At last, and as if it were rather an effort, he said, "Colonel Brandon seems a man of great worth and respectability. I have always heard him spoken of as such, and your brother, I know, esteems him highly. He is undoubtedly a sensible man, and in his manners perfectly the gentleman." "Indeed," replied Eleanor, "I believe that you will find him on farther acquaintance all that you have heard of him to be. And as you will be such very near neighbours, for I understand the parsonage is almost close to the mansion house, it is particularly important that he should be all this." Edward made no answer, but when she had turned away her head, he gave her a look so serious, so earnest, so uncheerful, as seemed to say that he might hereafter wish the distance between the parsonage and the mansion house much greater. I think he thinks she's marrying Brandon, and she thinks he's marrying Lucy, while they're both Dumbos, and they're actually marrying each other, I hope. Oh, God. "Colonel Brandon, I think, lodges in St. James's Street," he said, soon afterwards rising from his chair. God damn it! Eleanor told him the number of the house. God damn you! I must hurry away, then, to give him those thanks which you will not allow me to give you, to assure him that he has made me an exceedingly happy man. Eleanor did not offer to detain him, and they parted with very earnest assurances on her side of her unceasing good wishes for his happiness in every change of situation that might befall him, on his, with rather an attempt to return the same goodwill than the power of expressing it. When I see him again, said Eleanor to herself as the door shut him out, I shall see him as the husband of Lucy. insert insert a tone only dogs can hear here. With this pleasing anticipation, she sat down to reconsider the past, recall the words, and endeavor to comprehend all the feelings of Edward, and of course to reflect on her own with discontent. Turn back, Edward! And when Mrs. Jennings came home, though she returned from seeing people whom she had never seen before, and of whom therefore she must have a great deal to say, her mind was so much more occupied by the important secret in her possession than by anything else that she reverted to it again as soon as Eleanor appeared. Sorry, Patricia. Great minds think alike. As soon as she reverted to it again, as soon as Eleanor appeared. Well, my dear, she cried, I sent you up the young man. Did I not do right? And I suppose you had no great difficulty. You did not find him very unwilling to accept your proposal. No, ma'am, that was not very likely. And well, and how soon will he be ready? For it seems all to depend upon that. Really, said Eleanor, I know so little of these kind of forms that I can hardly even conjecture as to the time, or the preparation necessary, but I suppose 2 or 3 months will complete his ordination. 2 or 3 months? Cried Mrs. Jennings. Lord, my dear, how calmly you talk of it, and can the Colonel wait 2 or 3 months? What's going to happen to him? Lord bless me, I am sure it would put me quite out of patience. And though one would be very glad to do kindness by poor Mr. Ferris, I do think it is not worthwhile to wait 2 or 3 months for him. Sure, somebody else might be found that would do as well, somebody that is in orders already. My dear ma'am, said Eleanor, what can you be thinking of? Why, Colonel Brandon's only object is to be of use to Mr. Ferris. Lord bless you, my dear. Sure you do not mean to persuade me that the Colonel only marries you for the sake of giving 10 guineas to Mr. Ferris? And Eleanor's like, marries who? The deception could not continue after this, and an explanation immediately took place, by which both gained considerable amusement for the moment without any material loss of happiness to either, for Mrs. Jennings only exchanged one form of delight for another, and still without forfeiting her expectation of the first. Aye, the parsonage is but a small one, said she, after the ebullition. I'm just gonna, every time I hit a word that I'm not sure how to pronounce something, I'm just gonna pronounce it the worst possible way, and one day I will kill Shiver Patricia. She said after the first ebullition of surprise and satisfaction was over, and very likely may be out of repair, but to hear a man apologizing, as I thought, for a house that to my knowledge has 5 sitting rooms on the ground floor, and I think the housekeeper told me could make up 15 beds, and to you too, that had been used to live in Barton Cottage, it seemed ridiculous. But my dear, we must touch up the Colonel to do something to the parsonage, and make it comfortable for them before Lucy goes to it. But Colonel Brandon does not seem to have any idea of the livings being enough to allow them to marry. 5 sitting rooms on the ground floor. How big is this place? But Colonel Beauchamp, that was Eleanor's line, the Colonel is a ninny, my dear, because he has 2,000 a year himself. He thinks that nobody else can marry on less. Take my word for it, that if I am alive, I shall be paying a visit at Delaford Parsonage before the Michaelmas, and I am sure I shan't go if Lucy aren't there. Eleanor was quite of her opinion as to the probability of their not waiting for anything more. Let me get a sip of water. Delicious. All right, let me see how. What the hell? It's Friday. Let's go for it. Chapter 5. Edward, having carried his thanks to Colonel Brandon, proceeded with his happiness to Lucy, and such was the excess of it by the time he reached Bartlett's building that she was able to assure Mrs. Jennings, who called on her again the next day with her congratulations, that she had never seen him in such spirits before in her life. School? Her own happiness and her own spirits were at least very certain, and she joined Mrs. Jennings most heartily in her expectation of their being all comfortably together in Delaford Parsonage before Michaelmas. Michaelmas. I don't like it. So far was she at the same time from any backwardness to Eleanor, that credit which Edward would give her, that she spoke of her friendship for both with the most grateful warmth, and was ready to own all their obligation to her, and openly declare that no exertion for their good on Miss Dashwood's part, either present or future, would ever surprise her, for she believed her capable of doing anything in the world for those she really valued. As for Colonel Brandon, she was not only ready to worship him as a saint, but was moreover truly anxious that he should be treated as one in all worldly concerns, anxious that his fifths should be raised to the utmost, and secretly resolved to avail herself, at Delaford, as far as she possibly could, of his servants, his carriages, his cows, and his poultry. It was now above a week since John Dashwood had called in Berkeley Street, and as since that time no one had been taken by them And since that time, no notice had been taken by them of his wife's indisposition. Beyond one verbal inquiry, Eleanor began to feel it necessary to pay her a visit. This was an obligation, however, which not only opposed her own inclination, but which had not the assistance of any encouragement from her companions. Marianne, not contented with absolutely refusing to go herself, was very urgent to prevent her sister's going at all. And Mrs. Jennings, though her carriage was always at Eleanor's service, so very much disliked Mrs. John Dashwood that even her curiosity to see how she looked after the late discovery, nor her strong desire to affront her by taking Edward's part, could overcome her unwillingness to be in her company again. The consequence was that Eleanor set out by herself to pay a visit for which no one could really have less inclination, and to run the risk of a tete-a-tete with a woman whom neither of the others had so much reason to dislike. Mrs. Dashwood was denied, but before the carriage could turn from the house, her husband accidentally came out. He expressed great pleasure in meeting Eleanor, told her that he had just been going to call in Berkeley Street, and assuring her that Fanny would be very glad to see her, invited her to come in. Brother. They walked upstairs to the drawing room. Nobody was there. "Fanny is in her own room, I suppose," said he. "I will go to her presently, for I am sure she will not have the least objection in the world to seeing you. Very far from it, indeed. Now especially, that cannot be, but however, you and Marianne were always great favourites. Why would not Marianne come?" Eleanor made what excuse she could for her. "I am not sorry to see you alone," he replied, "for I have a good deal to say to you. That living of Colonel Brandon's, can it be true? Has he really given it to Edward? I heard it yesterday by chance, and was coming to you on purpose to inquire farther about it." "It is perfectly true. Colonel Brandon has given the living of Delaford to Edward." "Really? Well, this is astonishing. No relationship, no connection between them. And now that livings fetch such a price. What was the value of his?" "About 200 a year." "Very well. And for the next presentation to a living of that value, supposing the late incumbent to have been old and sickly and likely to vacate it soon, he might have got, I dare say, £1,400. But how came he not to have settled that matter before this person's death? Now, indeed, it would be too late to sell it, but a man of Colonel Brandon's sense, I wonder he should be so improvident in a point of such common, such natural concern. Well, I am convinced that there is a vast deal of inconsistency in almost every human character. I suppose, however, on recollection, that the case may probably be this. Edward is only to hold on to the living till the person to whom the colonel has really sold the presentation is old enough to take it. Aye, that is the fact, depend on it. Eleanor contradicted it, however, very positively, and by relating that she had herself been employed in conveying the offer from Colonel Brandon to Edward, and therefore must understand the terms on which it was given, obliged him to submit to her authority. It is truly astonishing, he cried after hearing what she said. What could be the colonel's motives? A very simple one. To be of use to Edward. Oh, shit. To be of use to Mr. Ferris. Of course she wouldn't call him Edward. Okay. Well, well, whatever Colonel Brandon may be, Edward is a very lucky man. You will not mention the matter to Fanny, however, for though I have broke it to her, she bears it vastly well. She will not like to hear it much talked of. Eleanor had some difficulty here to refraining from observing that she thought Fanny might have borne with composure an acquisition of wealth to her brother, by which neither she nor her child could be possibly impoverished. Mrs. Ferris, he added, lowering his voice to the tone becoming so important a subject, knows nothing about it at present, and I believe it will be best to keep it entirely concealed from her as long as may be. When the marriage takes place, I fear she must hear of it all. But why should such precaution be used? Though it is not to be supposed that Mrs. Ferris can have the smallest satisfaction in knowing that her son has money enough to live upon, for that must be quite out of the question. Yet why, after her late behaviour, is she supposed to feel at all? She has done with her son, she has cast him out for ever, and has made all those over whom she had any influence cast him off likewise. Surely, after doing so, she cannot be imagined liable to any impression of sorrow or joy on his account. She cannot be interested in anything that befalls him. She would not be so weak as to throw away the comfort of a child, and yet retain the anxiety of a parent. Damn! Eleanor just slayed her. Ah, Eleanor, said John, your reasoning is very good, but it is founded on ignorance of human nature. Oh, Sir John, when Edward's unhappy match takes place, depend upon it, his mother will feel as much as if she had never discarded him, and therefore every circumstance that may accelerate that dreadful event must be concealed from her as much as possible. Mrs. Ferris can never forget that Edward is her son. You surprised me. I think it must nearly have escaped her memory by this time. Exactly, that's what I'm thinking, Dane. I think she lucked out here. Maybe Colonel Brandon has a brother. Oh, wait, he does! Oh, no! Whew. You are wrong her exceedingly. You wrong her exceedingly. Mrs. Ferris is one of the most affectionate mothers in the world. Eleanor was silent. We think now, said Mr. Dashwood after a short pause, of Robert's marrying Miss Morton. Eleanor, smiling at the grave and decisive importance of her brother's tone, calmly replied, The lady, I suppose, has no choice in the affair. Choice? How do you mean? I only mean that I suppose from your manner of speaking it must be the same to Miss Morton whether she marry Edward or Robert. Certainly, there can be no difference. For Robert will now, to all intents and purposes, be considered the eldest son, and as to anything else, they are both very agreeable young men. I do not know that one is superior to the other. Eleanor said no more, and John was also for a short time silent. His reflections ended thus. Of one thing, my dear sister, kindly taking her hand and speaking in an awful whisper, I may assure you, and I will do it because I know it must gratify you. I have good reason to think, indeed I have it from the best authority, or I should not repeat it, for otherwise it would be very wrong to say anything about it, but I have it from the best authority. Not that I ever precisely heard Mrs. Ferris say it herself, but her daughter did, and I have it from her, that in short, whatever objections there might be against a certain connection, you understand me, it would have been far preferable to her. It would not have given her half the vexation that this does. I was exceedingly pleased to hear that Mrs. Ferris considered it in that light, a very gratifying circumstance, you know, to us all. It would have been beyond comparison, she said, the least of the evil too, and she would be glad to compound it now for nothing worse, but, however, all that is quite out of the question, not to be thought of or mentioned. As to any attachment, it could never be. All this is gone by. But I thought I would just tell you of this, because I knew how much it must please you. Now that you have Not that you have any reason to regret, my dear Eleanor. There is no doubt of your doing exceedingly well. Quite as well, or better, perhaps, all things considered. Has Colonel Brandon been with you lately? Okay. So I'm pretty sure what he just said was like, so I was like, talking, I have it like, I'm like, okay, I had used to have to do this for Shakespeare, and it's really hard. He was like, so like, I heard, well, I didn't hear, I mean, I heard from like a really reliable source, but I also like, I heard it from like my wife, who heard it from her mom. So like, just like, I heard it. I know it. But anyways, we really would have preferred you to marry Edward, even though we don't really like you that much, but you're definitely not worse than Lucy. So it would have been better for you to do that, but now it's kind of all blown. So anyways, just in case you thought that we didn't like you, we do like you. We just actually like Lucy less. I think that helps, right? Like, but now you can just marry the Colonel. So that's fine. You're fine. You're going to be fine. Anyways. Yeah. So in case you thought we hated you, we don't hate you as much as we hate Lucy. Yeah. So I'm pretty sure that's what he just said. Eleanor had heard enough, if not to gratify her vanity and raise her self-importance, to agitate her nerves and fill her mind, and she was therefore glad to be spared from the necessity of saying much in reply herself, and from the danger of hearing anything more from her brother by the entrance of Mr. Robert Ferrars. After a few moments' chat, John Dashwood, recollecting that Fanny was yet uninformed of his sister's being here, I gotta take another drink. Yeah, what a thoughtful guy. Oh man, I'm sorry. Okay. Quitted the room in quest of her, and Eleanor was left to improve her acquaintance with Robert, who, by the gay unconcern, the happy self-complacency of his manner while enjoying so unfair a division of his mother's love and liberality, to the prejudice of his banished brother, earned only by his own dissipated course of life, that the brother's integrity was confirming her most unfavorable opinion of his head and heart. They had scarcely been 2 minutes by themselves before he began to speak of Edward, for he too had heard of the living and was very inquisitive on the subject. Eleanor repeated the particulars of it as she had given them to John, and their effect on Robert, though very different, was not less striking than it had been on him. He laughed most immoderately. The idea of Edward's being a clergyman and living in a small parsonage house diverted him beyond measure, and when to that was added the fanciful imagery of Edward reading prayers in a white surplice and publishing the banns of marriage between John Smith and Mary Brown, he could conceive nothing more ridiculous. Eleanor, whilst she waited in silence and immovable gravity, the conclusion of such folly could not restrain her eyes from being fixed on him with a look that spoke all the contempt it excited. It was a look, however, very well bestowed, for it relieved her own feelings and gave no intelligence to him. He was recalled from wit to wisdom, not by any reproof of hers, but by his own sensibility. "We may treat it as a joke," said he at last, recovering from the affected laugh which had considerably lengthened the genuine gaiety of the moment. "But upon my soul, it is a most serious business. Poor Edward! He is ruined forever. I am extremely sorry for it, except that now I am super rich. I am extremely sorry for it, for I know him to be a very good-hearted creature, as well as meaning a fellow perhaps as any in the world. You must not judge of him, Miss Dashwood, from your slight acquaintance. Poor Edward! Oh, fuck, he's really going to keep talking. His manners are certainly not the happiest in nature, but we are not all born, you know, with the same powers, the same address. Poor fellow, to see him in a circle of strangers. To be sure, it was pitiable enough, but upon my soul, I believe he has as good a heart as any in the kingdom, and I declare and protest to you, I never was so shocked in my life when it all burst forth. I could not believe it. My mother was the first person who told me of it, and I, feeling myself called on to act with resolution, immediately said to her, 'My dear madam, I do not know what you may intend to do on the occasion, but as for myself, I must say that if Edward does marry this young woman, I will never see him again.
That was what I said immediately. I was most uncommonly shocked myself. Poor Edward. He has done for himself completely. Shut himself out of ever from decent society. But, as I directly said to my mother, I am not in the least surprised at it. From his style of education, it was always to be expected. My poor mother was half frantic.
This is like the Donald Duck of characters. Have you ever seen the lady?
Yes, once, while she was staying in this house. I happened to drop in for 10 minutes. I was quite enough of her. The merest awkward country girl, without style or elegance, and almost without beauty. I remember her perfectly.
Oh my god, he's like Donald Trump.
Ew. I remember her perfectly. Just the kind of girl I should suppose likely to captivate poor Edward. I offered immediately, as soon as my mother related the affair to me, to talk to him myself, and dissuade him from the match. But it was too late then, I found, to do anything, for, unluckily, I was not in the way at first, and knew nothing of it till after the breach had taken place, when it was not for me, you know, to interfere. But I had been informed of it a few hours earlier. I think it is most probable that something might have been hit on. I certainly should have represented it to Edward in a very strong light. My dear fellow, I should have said, consider what you are doing. You are making a most disgraceful connection, and such a one as your family are unanimous in disapproving. I cannot help but thinking, in short, that means might have been found, but now it is all too late. He must be starved, you know. That is certain. Absolutely starved.
Jesus! He had just settled this point with great composure, when the entrance of Mrs. John Dashwood put an end to the subject. But though she never spoke of it out of her own family, Elinor could see its influence on her mind, in the something like confusion of countenance with which she entered, and an attempt at cordiality in her behaviour to herself. She even proceeded so far as to be concerned to find that Elinor and her sister were so soon to leave town, and she had hoped to see more of them, an exertion in which her husband, who attended her into the room and hung enamored over her accents, seemed to distinguish everything that was most affectionate and graceful. And that's the end of the chapter. Just full of dummies. Just 2 chapters full of dum-dums. Oh, Edward. Oh, Edward. Oh, buddy. Okay, well. Oh, hello, Shiv. All right, that's all for today. I had another sneaky little hint for you. It's this. That's what my dad does. It's all congealed into one large hunk. And it hits me every time I sip. Drinks, Lamau. Drinks. It's shots. Your hint is shots. I'm going to go do a shot. I also want to just sit in this ice. Okay. Poor Elinor, indeed. I don't know how Edward is going to fix this. Colonel Brandon has opportunity now to get in with Marianne, but Edward is just tracking shit all over the house. I don't know how he's going to do it, but we can only hope. All right. Tomorrow is Saturday, so I will be in at 3 as usual. I'm going to bake a cake tomorrow. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. With that cake, I'm sure I will be in the middle of doing something with it as soon as we get there. Okay, I'm going to go pass out and maybe watch some TV. Okie doke. Nice to see you all. Have a good rest of your day. Stay cool. Goodbye.